Hey, welcome again. I want to add an additional welcome to people from Webster Groves Nature Study Society. President Lisa Nan Steele is back there. And anyone else who came and wanted to hear this presentation by Chris Brown. Chris tells me he grew up here in Webster Groves, which is an admirable quality right there. He got his doctorate in entomology in Montana at the University of Montana Bozeman, and he's been employed by Monsanto and Bayer for over 20 years as a research entomologist. He's also the chair of entomology for Webster Groves Nature Study Society and doing a lot of work in that position. So, Chris, please come on up.
Thank you, Bill. All right, well, thanks a lot, Bill. Really glad to be here. This topic, insect decline, it's a really key topic for us to think through, and it's complicated, right? There's no way I'm going to get through it in 40 minutes. Do we still have 40 minutes? Yeah, okay. But I'll start to hit on some of these themes, some of these topics. Okay, got it. And hopefully we'll have a chance to chat a little bit afterwards and get into some discussion. Okay, and so I got an idea, and I'll show you where from, to throw in some images in the background here. And so all the images that I pulled here are from Missouri. Okay, and so I guess they say it's a good thing to try to connect with your audience anytime you're doing a presentation. And so here's my attempt at that. Yeah, I am an entomologist, but I really like birds. So it was this close from going into grad school to study avian ecology. And so I was going through memory lane and throwing up on the screen there a few of the places that I had worked before I kind of went full bore towards entomology. And I do report on eBird. I'm sure it's just a drop in the bucket compared to a lot of you Audubon folks, but yeah, I definitely a big fan of birds. The other thing too I thought was cool to start off with is, and just because the insects are so important, to echo a quote from E.O. Wilson. So he, ahead of an address, he said, "Let me say a word on behalf of these little things that run the world." And I think that's why we're talking about them today. So we care enough about insect decline because they're so important. Okay, and so just trying to stay up with the times, the first thing I thought about is, well, what does AI say? Well, in this case, it was Microsoft Copilot. And so when I put in what is insect decline, we get, it's a pressing environmental issue that has far-reaching consequences. Obviously, they make up a lot of the life on Earth, and then delving into the details, and it talks about the reasons why. So, okay, it's not bad. It gives you some sources, but those sources are all secondary sources. It goes to articles from articles. So, it was not bad. So I thought, okay, let's stir the pot a little bit and see, well, what does it say about insect apocalypse? And so it goes from a pressing, what did it say? Pressing environmental issue to a dire phenomenon. So if you kind of ratchet it up a little bit when you bring up the insect apocalypse, and it also mentions, because it's just pulling from articles that are out there, and I mean popular press articles in that sense, that 75% or more in terms of abundance is being lost, or has been lost, right? That's true in some cases, but when you get it from AI, it kind of dumbs down that topic, because we're not having 75% decline in abundance globally. So you get one bit of the true story there, and then it goes again into the causes, but then also adds consequences here. So anyway, I thought that would be a fun place to start. Oh, okay, let's stir the pot a little bit more and ask AI if the insect apocalypse is a hoax. And so now it says, well, yeah, there is some significant debate as well as concern on the topic, and it goes into some evidence. And again, it's pulling from just popular press articles, and I'll just focus in real quick on that number 2, media versus scientific views. There's been some controversy in that space, how the media interprets what they're seeing in the primary literature. But it says insect apocalypse to describe how industrial farming methods contribute to insect decline, which of course is, I mean, that's one thing, one of many things that they've been thinking about. But for some reason, it zeroed in on that. And of course, it's just depending on the article that it looked at. Okay, so moving on. Lots of headlines. So I haven't seen as many, but right around after that Hallmann paper came out through late teens, there were a lot of dire headlines. The insect apocalypse is here. You'll miss them when they're gone. Insectageddon, that little bee, or is that a fly with the mushroom cloud over it? The collapse of insects. So yeah, I mean, it really got picked up by the media after that Hallmann paper, which we'll talk about a little bit. And so why are we so worried at the possibility of losing insects? And one of the reasons, and we love our birds, right? But if an alien came down today and asked you, give me a high level bullet on biodiversity of Earth, well, probably couldn't go to birds. Probably had to start with insects, just because they are so dominant. So, I mean, that's one reason why they're so important. And not only are they very dominant, but they're very influential in our ecosystem. So, one presentation that I had seen a while back said, hey, just remember your 5 Ps in terms of importance of insects. And first off is pollinators. And I know this is well-trodden ground, but the stats are, 80% of plants are insect pollinated and 75% of crops are insect pollinated. So right away, pretty important. They're prey, right? So they're at the base of the food chain for many animals. Physical decomposers. And I always, when I think about my 5 Ps, I kind of substitute in poop there because I can remember that easier than physical decomposers. But it also reminds me of the really nice example, because you might think, yeah, what's the big deal? Decomposing dung or poop, feces. There's a really nice example from Australia after we introduced cattle there in the 1800s. They didn't have any native insects that degraded, decomposed cattle dung. So they had cattle dung piling up in the pastures. And of course, once that happened, the cattle don't like to feed there, so they'd have to move them to new areas. So obviously that's a problem, and it was driving lots of crazy level of fly populations, which apparently flies don't do a good enough job of decomposing cattle dung. So at some point, an entomologist got involved and recognized, hey, you're missing dung beetles. There are no dung beetles that can degrade the cattle dung. So they brought in dung beetles from Africa, and it solved the problem. So it does matter, right? And then there's some utility of insects in science and technology, and for me, this is a big one. I get a lot of pleasure from watching and learning about insects. I think entomology has a pretty high job satisfaction because there's so much variety. Every day you're learning something new because there's so much to learn about insects. And I tack on one more, predators, right? So they're really important for biocontrol as well. Oh, and so John Losey and Vaughn in 2006, they studied, what is the value of ecosystem services from insects. And in this case, they didn't even focus in on the obvious one, pollination by honeybees, right? They focused on wild insects around dung burial, pest control, pollination, and wildlife nutrition. And they came up with a number of 57 billion per year in North America. The number for honeybees is like 10 times that. So it's a significant amount of money that we get from ecosystem services provided by insects. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the literature. The paper that came out in 2017 is the one that drove those headlines that we saw in the previous slide. And so the title was "More than 75% Decline Over 27 Years in Total Flying Insect Biomass in Protected Areas." Okay, and this study, of course, happened in Germany. It came from kind of a humble source, Krefeld Entomological Society, not so different from the Wignis group. It's a local nature study group, in this case focusing on entomology, but they had started malaise trap surveys dating back to 1989. Not because they thought, oh, this is going to be great information so we can monitor, population levels of insects, but it was more because they like to collect insects. And so they set up these standardized collecting methods. So what they did, they used these malaise traps that you see on the right-hand side in what they call a kind of the protected areas off of the agricultural land. So relatively small, not like an expanse, but still set aside areas where they set up these malaise traps, and they put in maybe typical German efficiency or style. They did it all very consistently, so that once we did have this opportunity to look back and see what was happening in terms of population, or in this case biomass dynamics over the years, it was data that we could really use to tell the story. So now those samples take up an entire floor of an old school building, and it was a really historic project, because it kind of shook the world. So it was one of the top 6 papers discussed in 2017. So big deal. So here's just a line showing that mean decline over that time. And they also kind of thought about, well, what might be driving that in this case? So they looked at, well, temperature did rise a little bit over that time. Precipitation, it got a little bit drier. So did these factors have any connection to the decline? And there was some influence, but nothing really could account for the dramatic drop that we saw, that 75% decline. And the thing, it's for those of us that were kind of watching what was happening with insect populations, this was not a surprise at all. There had been kind of almost equally drops reported in other literature before that, especially in Europe, though. Maybe most notably this defaunation in the Anthropocene in 2014, where they reported 67% of monitored populations show 45% mean abundance decline. So that's pretty significant. So dating back to, well, you see it there in 1994, or even before, we were monitoring insect declines at that time too. Okay, and so that Hallmann paper kind of prompted articles like this one. And I liked one kind of quote that Jarvis had mentioned in this case. So what we're losing is not just the diversity part of biodiversity, but the bio part in sheer quantity. And that's also that concept of that paper that we just saw, the defaunation in the Anthropocene. So it's not that we're just losing diversity of species. We're actually losing the mass, the ability of that group, that whole entire group, to provide those ecosystem services that we were talking about. And another paper that came out in a similar time frame, and this one was in 2022. It was awesome. It was so cool. The illustrations really did a good job of capturing and bringing home the importance of insects, you know, for biodiversity. So it was a really nice article. Although they were sounding this alarm, you know, the collapse of insects, which is pretty dramatic claim. And I just have that quote down on the right-hand side. Fireflies, also known as lightning bugs, may soon blink out. 14 of 128 firefly species are threatened in the US and Canada. It's like they just couldn't pass up the opportunity to say that blink out, right? It was too, it sounded just too catchy. But really, I think around the same time, a lot of scientists were saying, well, hold on, like, what do we really know? And so we'll get into that in the presentation too. So other papers followed in Germany. So it wasn't just Hallmann. Soon after, other people were digging into historical databases to see, okay, what is happening? And so in this case, is Siebold in 2019, looking and finding similar declines in other grasslands, and then also some declines as well in forests too, maybe not as strong. Let me just take one step back because I'm looking at the pictures of the bees at the bottom. Those two articles, they were so well illustrated. I thought that was really one thing they did really nice. And so it kind of prompted me, I need to throw some color in here, and I put a bunch of Missouri insects. For those people that get tired of looking at figures and titles, you can just check out the bugs. And so it wasn't just biomass, because a lot of people were saying, well, it's you know, there's a decline in biomass, but what does that ultimately mean? Where I think a lot of people would appreciate it means something, right? For sure. But that prompted the Hallmann group to go back and look at a certain group of species, in this case, the Syrphidae or hoverflies. And what they found out that yeah, there was also a decline in species, and then not only in species, but even a bigger decline in abundance, as well as biomass too. So it wasn't just biomass, it was also in number of species and number of individuals too. Okay, there we got the circles. And I don't know how many people realize, but we kind of have a connection to insect decline here in St. Louis. So in 2019, the Entomological Society of America meeting was here. And there was kind of a really important summit for insect decline. It's called Insect Decline in the Anthropocene. And we had presenters like David Wagner, who wrote the book of Eastern Caterpillars of North America, which is a really nice book. Peter Raven spoke there, a prominent entomologist, May Berenbaum, Martin Sorg, who was one of the authors on the Hallmann paper, Dan Jansen, who probably, if you have forayed down to the tropics, you poured through his book before you went, which is a natural history of Costa Rica, and others. And some, you know, the authors of those two papers, they were there too. There was a lot of press there. So it was kind of a big deal. And it was a really nice symposium, but just a note to you all, it's on YouTube, and all you need to do is, you see what I put in there, ESA 2019 insect decline. It'll pop up for you. So some really nice presentations there. In that presentation, or in that symposium, one impressive one, kind of one of the keynotes, was Dan Jansen and Winnie Hallwax, who have spent many years in Costa Rica looking at caterpillars, leps, and the parasitoids of them. They work in a place called Guanacaste Forest Reserve, and they've witnessed in the many years they've been there, which I think is, like, Dan was down there maybe starting in the 60s or something, a really dramatic reduction of insects, and now they're trying to do something about it. They didn't collect a lot of data, or they didn't show a lot of data of their decline, but here you just see the black line in the bottom left that shows the number of caterpillars found over time. And that red line is the number of people that were actually looking for them. And so where the people looking, the searching effort, you might say, where it peaked out, that's where the caterpillars peaked as well. And then you'd say, well, that makes sense. There's more people looking. But then the same number of people found less and less. And the decline was somewhere similar to what Hallmann et al. had previously reported. And it's not just the caterpillars that were declining, also their parasitoids were as well. And he put it in kind of picture form by just looking at a blacklight sheet that they had run. This is in 1984. And he said, this is a typical number of insects that would show up to the blacklight there. And then in 2007, another typical amount, fairly good numbers. And here's what it looked like in 2019. And I mean, my first thought was, come on, Dan, this is one picture of one night, but he made it clear that this is consistent. This is what they see night after night when they blacklight currently. So dramatically different populations of insects coming to their blacklights. And this is probably very influential in why that is. So the cloud forest, you can see it in 1985, where the clouds are heavily over those mountains. 1995, more days where you had fewer clouds, and then even more days with fewer clouds in 2015. And so you can, I mean, if you've ever spent some time in cloud forest, you probably appreciate it's chilly, it's cold, and it's not a really nice place to hang out. We would prefer those sunny days, but the insects and the other things that live there, they require that heavy cloud cover. Without that cloud cover, obviously it's warmer, and other things are able to move up into those habitats. Things like army ants that weren't there before. So you can imagine if army ants are moving into those areas and they weren't there before, they're going to take a heavy toll on the insect populations there. And here's a couple other examples of insect decline linked to climate change. One was in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where they were also doing some malaise trapping. And then another was in forest in New Hampshire, in Hubbard Brook, where they monitored an 83% decline in beetle captures over a 45-year period, with 19 beetle families disappearing entirely. And they tied that to reduction in snowpack. The snowpack kept the soil a little bit warmer during the winter and helped preserve the insects during winter. So, I mean, pretty stark numbers there. And the other thing too, generally we think about declining populations, birds, insects, whatever, that the rare species are declining. And what was especially alarming in this case is that they were having lots of results where it wasn't just rare species declining, it was the really common ones, the common species that do the grunt work of ecosystem services. And there was an important paper that came out of Puerto Rico. In this case, they reported a 60% loss of insect abundance in Puerto Rico and collapse of food webs. And they attributed it to a 2-degree rise in temperature. It was important because it came out right after the Hallmann paper. So, okay, we just saw that in Germany. Now we're seeing it in Puerto Rico too. So it was really alarming. And these are sorts of the information that was being pulled into those articles that we saw a minute ago. And my final point on this topic is just don't commit this paper to your long-term memory just yet. And this is where some of the controversy comes in. Same warning on this one. This was a review, so they compile a lot of information to see, okay, what are the overall trends? And in this case, our work reveals dramatic rates of decline that may lead to the extinction of 40% of the world's insect species over the next few decades. And again, the press ate that up, and you see this quote all over the place on the internet. But yeah, again, just hold on that one. Okay, so lots of doom and gloom. Case closed. Is the insect apocalypse upon us? Well, no. I mean, we know there's a lot to be concerned about, but there's also a lot of uncertainty out there. It's just not that simple. You've got conclusions that vary by taxa, by place. Drivers are obviously very different across these different situations. I think I had north of 200 papers in a folder that I've been collecting over time for this. So we do have a lot of literature, but still, I mean, considering the diversity of insects and the different situations that we'd be concerned about, we just really have a severe lack of information. Not to mention that those long-term data sets that everybody jumped on back in the late teens, they used those, right? And then the review articles came out after that, compiling multiple long-term data sets. And so we went through that and we told that story, but there wasn't a whole lot of other ones to fall back on. Especially in North America, I mean, compared to Europe, where they were having a whole lot of these data sets, we had some good information, but less so here, and the rest of the world considerably less. Right, and so we're not representing well what's going on across the world, and of course, not all of the studies show consistent trends, and we'll talk about a couple of those examples. Yeah, and so we had also what we see as we try to figure out what's actually happening. We see conflict in the primary literature and then also in the popular media as they're describing the primary literature. And one thing that you always have to keep in mind is when you look at these back and forth discussions between scientists and the literature, is it, we're generally a pretty skeptical lot. So we'll dive in and argue about some minutia, but it doesn't mean that the overall message is not right. And so we'll hit on a couple of examples of that. Okay, and so of course, we have these winners and losers. And in this study by Pony et al., they looked at pollinators from Britain, so bees and in this case hoverflies. And you see the figure on the left, where if those, it's looking at annual percent change for different species. If you're below that middle line, you're in decline. And if you're above it, you're increasing. And so the general results that they had is that 33% of wild pollinator species have decreased, 10% increasing, and then 50%, 57% not changing. So, that concept of winners or losers, it looked like just a lot of losers in Germany at first. But the other data sets definitely are not saying the same thing. And the complexity within the data sets. So on the right-hand side, the red line of that figure is showing that red is, or orange is hoverflies. And so those red dots are showing areas of significant decline. So you had early on during this sampling scheme, more declines in hoverflies than the blue line, which are bees. So early on, hoverflies are declining. Later on, the blue line, where you see more of those red dots, bees are declining, but then the hoverflies aren't so much. So it's really hard to kind of dig through the data and just tell one simple story, which kind of got mixed up a little bit in the media that really like to have a nice clean soundbite. Okay, so let's go back to that Sanchez Bio Wickheis review. Really quickly, 3 or 4 critical articles came out. And one thing I'd like to say about those articles is sometimes when you have these back and forth arguments, you might say, in the literature, it sounds kind of nasty. That people are maybe not always the kindest. They're very straightforward. But to the credit, and maybe in contrast to how we are kind of acting in politics these days, as I read these critiques, I appreciated that they recognized, hey, Sanchez Bio, Wikis, get it, appreciate the effort. There's some helpful information, and then they explained the different issues that review had. But I thought it was just worth pointing out that at least they tried to do it in a polite way. But here's what they said about that Sanchez Bio Wikis review. So it's not really global, right? And so they were making it sound like these are the global 40% extinction of species across the globe, right? And it's not really global, the data that they had to pull on. And that figure on the right-hand side just shows, we had information from this short list of countries. Many of them were European. And then on the bottom, those are the taxa that they looked at. So really overall, I mean, considering the diverse geographies and diversity of insects, it was a pretty limited data set that they were looking at. They used the word extinction when what they really meant was like local extirpations. Their search was only looking for papers with decline. So they didn't find anything by their design about papers that were showing stable populations or even increasing. So they were kind of already biased just by looking at papers only on decline. And then there's typos. And anytime you look through articles and you start seeing typos, you start to question kind of the whole effort. And so they mentioned that there's 293 stingless bees in Minnesota, which of course there are none of those in Minnesota. And then overemphasis on insecticides and not enough emphasis on climate change. That's something that David Wagner pointed out. Another paper, this is a one that didn't follow that narrative. So these are data from North America, from long-term ecological research sites. This is where a lot of our data come from, the long-term information. The Puerto Rico site, that was an LTER. So they started some of them, at least as early as 1980. The challenge here, and you can see in that map, the sites that they used were the black circles, and then those black diamonds. The information that was collected at each of these sites, it differed. We focused on, this review did, it focused on the invertebrate data collections, but they weren't always collecting the same thing. So that was one kind of complexity of that data set. But here are the results. So on the left-hand side, this is the main figure from the paper. The left-hand side, these are sites where they were monitoring for aquatics, and you can see it's up and down. The black area, these are sites that were monitoring for terrestrial arthropods that were in more protected areas. And then on the right-hand side, the orange, these were urban or agricultural areas. And the general takeaway is there was really no clear trend, and that was the point from their review. Although, there were, like, for example, the Hubbard Brook site, that was the paper that we talked about where they had an 83% decline. So there were definitely declines, but then there were also lots of upsides as well. So general story, it was really hard to see a clear signal. And then just to revisit that Puerto Rico paper. So in this case, Showalter et al., they came out with a paper called "The Arthropods Not Declining But Are Responsive to Disturbance in the Luquillo Experimental Forest in Puerto Rico." So the misstep that Lister and Garcia had taken there when they mentioned 60% loss of insect abundance and collapse of food webs, I mean, that's really dramatic, right? The authors, the kind of the owners of those data, they were open access, but the people that generated those data, Lister and Garcia never reached out to them to ask them, hey, can you give me a little heads up, anything I should watch out for as we do this analysis? And so the problem with that is they didn't mention specifically what data that they used, and they weren't, yeah, so they weren't clear about what data sets they used, and they didn't consult with the owners of the data. So the owners couldn't repeat the findings that they had. And they attributed that to many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons was because the data really weren't collected to monitor for that. They were collected to look at these effects of hurricanes that come through, which were massive. So it was something that really had to be taken with a grain of salt. But this is just one of the challenges of kind of sorting through all this information is you got to take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, and just a couple of other examples that are not so clear. So in Britain, this paper said moth biomass has fluctuated over 50 years, no clear trend. And then the one below by Van Klink, meta-analysis reveals declines in terrestrial, but increases in freshwater insect abundance. So again, this mixed picture. But just interestingly, that 1% per year bump up in freshwater aquatics, they thought was attributed to clean water legislation, which is positive, right? Because if we know that, yeah, there are steps that we can do that will likely help insect populations, that's a nice thing to know. What about Missouri? And just a quick peek here. Bob Marquis at UMSL did this collect, and I'm sure a lot of other people did this data collection on leaf chewing insects on a couple different species of oaks in the Ozarks. They started in 1981 and went through 2010. And basically what they found was it was really driven by too much noise from weather events. And you see a couple of examples where they point to spring freezes. There was a significant drought. And they said there's just too much noise based on weather. And it's a cautionary tale that you really need a lot of data over a long period of time, keeping a close eye on the weather. And to their, and so just for example, the variability, in one case, it was 645-fold difference, and then 890 fold difference on the other species of oak. So a lot of variability going on there. But to the credit, because anybody that looked at this figure, and I did as well, it's like, man, it looks like something's going on the left-hand side where they start up high. And they were just getting in front of that and mentioned that it was really too variable to make any clear conclusions. But they also mentioned that climate change may drive increased spring frosts or summer droughts, which we know by this data set and others that can be very influential. So it's possible that climate change could increase those events and cause more of a problem because the insects are highly susceptible to those events. I didn't want to get through this presentation without at least mentioning monarch butterfly, which we're all concerned about. We talk about this what is it, 80–90% drop from 96 and 97. And I think this is another one of those situations where, yeah, absolutely we should be doing whatever we can for monarch butterfly. But when you hear or see those headlines of 90% drop since 97, when you look at the 2 years that we have data before that obviously it's building up. So are we really looking at a 90% drop in monarch populations? Or are we looking at a 90% drop of monarch populations from this single year, right? And so it's like we kind of have to keep our common sense as we look at these headlines. So what do we make of the conflicting information? So anyway, it's a really good thing, right? So eventually we'll start with noise and argue back and forth, but we'll get to a place where our understanding is much better understood. And also it's good to see that at least it's not all doom and gloom that we initially saw out of Germany and the early data from Europe. Yeah, so I'll just pause with that one. Okay, and so why are insects declining? I'm just take a peek at the time. So a couple more minutes, are we good? Yeah. And again, nothing about this story is simple. And Dave Wagner, he published a paper and mentioned that it's probably a lot of different factors that are driving the decline. And he doesn't like using the term, but death by 1,000 cuts does seem to fit. So the top three that you oftentimes see listed is climate change, and we saw some pretty clear examples of that. Land use changes, which is probably somewhere in the mix for the Germany data as well as weather data, and then pesticides. So those are the top three that you normally see. But there are other ones as well. So competition due to invasive species are some really clear examples of that. Light pollution is a driver for insect declines. And I thought there was an interesting calculation that somebody had done. The total insect mortality would range between 60 to 130 billion deaths per summer season for just the country of Germany alone due to light pollution. And there's a good example too on some insects that are affected by light pollution. In this case, common glowworm in Europe, the females glow, they're on the ground. But if they are in an area where there's light, that prompts them to glow less, right? So they're less attractive, less obvious for males looking for them. And they don't move. They don't even move a little bit to get out of the way of that light. So it very easily describes how we could see a decline in an insect like that. And of course, we think of our own lightning bugs in the different family that, no, actually same family as that glowworm in Europe. Microplastics are mentioned, nitrification, car strikes. So Martin et al. Reported billions of insects are likely killed on the roads each year. But I just at the bottom put it's a conundrum. Many times we don't have a good explanation for the drastic declines that we've seen, and that's what kind of drove David Wagner to say that it looks like it might be issue with death from 1,000 cuts. Just a quick look at how much light pollution. We can just drive anywhere and see how obvious it is. But boy, yeah, when you look at this image, it's changed a lot over time. Okay, so just getting towards the end, Forrester et al. Said, hey, we know enough to act, and that was in 2019. So even though there's complexity, yeah, we don't know in certain areas or what's the driver, but we know enough to act. And the same person that had developed the 5 Ps, Kawahara, he and others published 8 simple actions that individuals can take to save insects from global declines. I'll just hit on a couple of them, and we were talking about some of these as we were standing out in the lobby. Convert lawns into diverse natural habitats. And I think people initially think, okay, I'm going to have tall grass everywhere and it's going to be a mess. But there's ways to do it that you can do it in a fairly clean way. So just small patches, right? It doesn't have to be, okay, I'm going to turn my front yard into a prairie tomorrow. But any additional nectar sources, host plants are going to be very helpful. Native plants, of course, are important. If you don't need pesticides and herbicides in your yard, don't use them. I get every couple of years somebody coming by, knocking on the door and say, hey, we can take care of all your pest needs. We'll treat your lawn. And I always talk to them. I always end up having a conversation with them and ask them, what do you do? Why are you doing that prophylactically? Why do you need to go out and apply pesticide in my yard when there's no problem? So let's just be smart. Use the tool when you need it, but don't use it when you don't. Limit exterior lighting and obviously runoff from various things, whether it's salt or soap. We'd want to reduce that as much as possible. And 6, 7, 8, I just say, hey, just increase your awareness. Stay up to speed on bird decline, on insect decline, and be aware and see what you can do about it. So in summary, I'll go ahead and just pause on this slide because we just talked through all these points. I'd much rather get into discussion if we have any time to do that. But anyway, thanks for listening to lots of words, and look forward to questions. Hey, Bill, can I bring the?
Talk loud. I just read an article in National Wildlife about a decline in entomologists. And they took it was serious.
Yeah.
Very few people coming up through the ranks to this work.
Yeah.
What do you know about it?
I know it's true. But yeah, so when we think about the people that are able to identify the insects that are collected, there are very few and far between specialists that can dive into the samples that like the Hallmann group collected and actually identify them. But there is one, DNA barcoding that is definitely a big help for identifying insects. But yeah, we need more bugologists. I'll ask you guys. I don't really use it. I mean, I do every once in a while. I use Bug Guide. I naturalist a little bit, but do people use Google Lens for identifying insects? Okay, it's limited. Um, yeah. What resources do you use, right? So the state entomologist, that's not a viable path, but what resources do you use to get your insects identified? Uh-huh. Yeah.
I know approximately,
Yeah.
but I don't really know. I see them swimming around the waters, has pictures.
Yeah.
But I don't have.
Well, I'll put a plug in for a Facebook page. I'll get the title wrong a little bit, I'm sure, but it's Insects of Missouri. Maybe it's Insects and Spiders of Missouri and neighboring states. But it's a pretty lively page, and people are very responsive, as people post pictures. So you might try that to help. It's pretty real time.
I raise relatively rare chickens, but I know a lot about chickens. And I can tell you that on Facebook and various pages like this, where you have a lot of people contributing, there's a huge amount of
Right. Oh, so I was smiling, but dangerous is true, right? I wouldn't smile about that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's something to watch out for. But I can vouch for the discussion. There are admins on this particular site that shut things down pretty fast. If things are kind of getting carried away. Another person put a brown recluse on, and there's lots of comments. But they do a good job of making sure information is accurate. But yeah, you're right. I don't know why people feel the need to give an identification if they don't know. I'm always baffled by that.
Is there an area of Missouri or a group of taxa that you would really like to see studied in a really long-term, in-depth way to get some local information to these broad questions?
Oh, that's a really nice question. So is there an area or a group that would be especially helpful? I would really like to do something similar to what Hallmann and the people in Rocky Mountain, that site as well, where they set up malaise traps. Because I feel like we need, yeah, you can go out and monitor monarch butterfly, right? And so then you get information on one species. But the nice thing about malaise traps is they capture information on lots of different species. So, you know, I would be looking for an effort that we would get a lot of bang for our buck and not just be able to comment on just a few. Now, my favorite group, the group that I study, tiger beetles, I would say absolutely. We need lots of funding to study more tiger beetles. But I don't know if everybody would agree with that. Yeah, John.
Several members of witness of a transit looking for measuring butterflies.
Great point. Yeah.
In a 20 years, it's not about 10 years.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. So John was just talking about a butterfly transect that's being started up in a couple of glades near St. Louis, to look at what butterflies are there and how many now compared to, what was it, like 20 years ago that they had done that. We need that, and then, you know, a lot more. So like, for example, in UK, they have short of 2,000 transects across the country. And many thousands of volunteers running those traps and transects too. It's just a level of engagement and activity that we just don't have here, but we would really benefit from. But yeah, really glad. So that Rich is starting those transects in those glades. Good. All right. What? Yeah.
Friday is National Arbor Day. So go out and hug a tree. And also by coincidence, John James Audubon's 239th birthday. So send him a birthday card.
Great.
My daughter's 39th.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. So if anybody wants these slides, they're yours. I want people to take this presentation and fix it and use it wherever they would like to.
Want to read.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
I was gonna say, I didn't want to add to the time, but when you